Chilly here with Sirius Dallas Moon. This is Jupiter Hour, Moon Day, and we basically have Moon conjoining Regulus, which is a good time to talk about the astrology of May, not without erasing some content that prevented me from saving the previous episode. So, yeah. Jupiter Hour right now. Jupiter is retrograde at 17 degrees Cancer. The Moon is in Regulus in the 8th house. But it is Jupiter hour. I think I think it's preferred not to wait to Mars hour. And I am talking about a cult which is compatible with 8th house. So May astrology and May is condensed. It is condensed with three lunations. We have May 1st, full moon in Scorpio on degree 11. May 16, new moon in Taurus conjoining Beta Persei. And May 31, full moon in Sagittarius conjoining Antares. So that's a lot of royal star activity. And trillion nations are definitely, no, thank you, are definitely making it quite challenging because there's a lot to process. Um, and the continuation of the symphony that has been playing throughout the year. The lunation where Lilith squared the nodes in March, we're going to have a full moon. Where Sedna and then Uranus has been in Taurus, we're going to have a new moon. And then we have the middle decan of Scorpio, which entire Scorpio is very karmic, but the middle decan is that scorpionic transformation. So we're going to see to the full extent of something that was deeply hidden, that could have even affected explosions, 11 degree. One of the things that I was recently exposed to is an interview with Douglas McIntyre by Annika Lucas podcast, where he talks about a scene where I think it was his father or his sibling. He was, as a child, supposed to murder a child, but his father murdered the child through him. Basically, his father held his hand, his father did everything, and his father told him that he was the murderer. This is very much like the mind control or the invisible realm behind crime. And I think the full moon in Scorpio is going to show that also regarding cases like Frank Olson and the suicide or the so-called suicide of Frank Olson. Again, Scorpio is incredibly deep. Beta Persei, are people going to turn to stone graves? Okay, is it going to be dead bodies upon dead bodies? Or are people going to abolish the ritual abuse and energy siphoning? It's basically the entire story of Medusa, because Procyon wanted probably not only Procyon, wanted her egg, her fertility, her youth, and maybe even to turn her into a mother for something that is controlled, while Beta Persei was not to be controlled. This could be why she so-called wasn't believed by the wife. Okay, I think it was Athena, that punished her because there was an inversion, and that inversion, trying to control humanity. um, Spiracy talks about it a lot, the attempt to use nature to try to clone or create a human being, but not from appreciation to creation, okay? But rather from trying to enslave. Um, and this is another facet of the story of Medusa Gorgon, where basically she was raped, perhaps to harvest her creative life. Then her hair was cursed. Hair is ancestry. Okay, they're trying to take her away from her roots, her hair. Um, and when she kept speaking up, they murdered her. But her rage was talisman that helped saving Andromeda. And yet even the saving of Andromeda was only if she will marry, which was another attempt to rape a woman in marriage. Okay? There is a lot that unravels regarding the myth. Neptune is in Aries. Vulcan, Neptune is in Aries. The foundation of our myth, the foundation of the stories, the actual practice of storytelling, the actual practice of myth. What do we mythify? Um, and Medusa, when worked talismanically, when venerated talismanically, is actually about setting boundaries to what caused the Medusa Gorgon story. So, this new moon in Taurus, and again, when Medusa is not raped, then it is a well talisman. But when she is raped, it is a symbol of decapitation, even harm to the eyes and the eyesight. Okay. Um, and on a mundane level, it is dead bodies upon dead bodies. The Egyptians saw that in eclipse days for Medusa Gorgon, there were a lot of disasters, and this is because the Egyptians um, basically did do blood sacrifice and did also have slavery. And this is why they were suffering from Medusa. And they were suffering so much that they knew to tell us that on the days of eclipse is bad days, but then there are, and this is why the eclipses, it's dead bodies upon dead bodies of those who were participating in the rape of Medusa, whether those that didn't believe her, those that actually raped, those that made of her crazy, those that blamed her for a rape. Those people definitely don't last. And then she has a benevolent phase where she's a wealth talisman. After the killing of the rapist, there is wealth. Why? Because the rapist wanted to exploit the life in the land, the life in matter. They wanted to take the life in matter and control it, and subdue it and enslave it. And rather than connect and enjoy abundance. So this is where, after she kills the rapists, actually there is abundance. Because there's no exploiters, so there's abundance, fertility. And this is where Beta Persei is a wealth talisman. And then towards the eclipse, it's a shield and talisman, because she offers her shield to the protectors, to those who don't participate in rape, and shielding from rape. And then she takes away again the dead bodies upon dead bodies of rapists. Now, because again, and we know a lot about Beta Persei thanks to the Egyptians, but the Egyptians themselves, they built the pyramid. The pyramid reached the pinnacle. They received the gnosis of the sixth line, aligning feminine masculine energy, but they were thinking that they should keep it as a knowledge for the elite. And in fact, it is the very basis that makes an empire sovereign. And this is the fact that if they try to control this information, this is where they had the disaster and they had to release the slaves. So whether the slaves were the Israelites or not, they had to release those who built the pyramid. And they couldn't keep the empire. They could only keep the empire if they had no slavery. That is the 6-9. When we align the feminine and masculine, nobody is enslaved, not within, and then we can release any need to oppress another. Okay, a free person is not oppress another. And where Beta Persei is here is that before they released the slaves, she killed the rapists. So she killed a rapist every 3 days. A lot of hard work because they weren't changing. They weren't realizing that all these people are dead because of that. They were just fearing Beta Persei, not knowing how to appease. So maybe they would try to sacrifice and so on and so forth. But they did also a ritual rape, which is antithetical to Beta Persei. To have the best of Beta Persei, we need to align with with life energy. So we need to align in the sense that Beta Persei is here to defend against any form of enslavement or the voices of, the testimony of, and then she is a well talisman. But for that well to be maintained, this and this new moon is telling another chapter in that story. May is the spring, is the time where the flowers bloom, and the flowers bloom and begin to give fruit. Something happens naturally. If we pick from the flowers, let's say if you have flowers, for example, and you want to make a tincture or you want to make tea, then if there are 2 flowers, you can take one, and then it encourages bloom. So you're not exploiting the plant, but you're assisting to the growth and the fertility of the plant. And then you have for the best tea or the best tinctures or oils infused with the flowers. The best is to use fresh as much as we can. And then the flowers during May already begin to bring the fruit. So that cannot be in rape-based society. Fruits, fertility cannot be in rape-based society, and cloning is attempt to control the birthing in order to enslave the people, and then to do all kinds of experiments. But those experiments are not venerating creation. Okay, we experiment with ourselves all the time. It's a part of the creative process, but there can be a calling to experiment in a way that honors creation and honors nature. Leonardo da Vinci came from the patronage of the Medicis, and he was the first empiricist. He looked at nature, and he did channel, but he looked at nature, and it's a reminder that also when it comes to channeling or the psychic abilities, they are yielding the most cohesion through embodiment, which is the Taurian process, and it comes to the pinnacle with Beta Persei. That, by the way, sidereally, she's very early on in Taurus. Sidereally is kind of like, well, if you want to enjoy the bounty of Taurus, you need to honor creation, to honor the sacred, to honor the sensual. Okay, which means no rape and then the psychic senses are yielding, and this is also where we would later reach Aldebaran, which, in order for Aldebaran to not be a Pyrrhus wind, it needs to come from basically the wind of those who protect from rape, or if it's no rape, then Aldebaran is the joy of the land, or being a land owner, or being on the land, because we have enjoyed creation and worked with the abundance of the land, and now we can settle in the land, or we can have our monuments or statues or art set on the land, which is considered as a victory of. But in times where there are people that don't honor the sensual, and don't honor in the sense that they rape or they try to control, then Aldebaran is victory in spiritual warfare and victory over the land of those who do not rape. Okay, and this is very important. Um, so Sagittarius lunation, again, Antares, health, psychic protection, and this is a full moon. So while Antares can denote, just like Aldebaran, being victorious over a fight, this is a victory in legacy. Okay, because if Aldebaran is land and the material resources, Antares is the psychic, realm, the medical realm, the spiritual realm, the philosophical realm. And again, Antares here um, is about that attunement with truth. We're probably going to see more about Antares. And Antares is also about gaining knowledge. Okay, so it's protecting truth. We cannot forget that Sagittarius is very Kundalini oriented, and the vice of Zeus is incest. When he doesn't go by that vice, then Kundalini rises and there is truth. If he does go by that vice, then to protect itself, it would need basically to abolish those type of obstructions to the life energy, because Sagittarius is about life energy transmutation, and this is where the knowledge was by transmuting. It's by awakening to nature and transmuting the life energy to discover truth. Okay, it's incredibly sexual. This is why I say I wrote today. I had to set a boundary with somebody that escaped ritual abuse, spoke up, but then he was tortured. Um, and I was told psychically that he was tortured. And then he began to call to rape. And this is very tragic to me. But the way I set that boundary, also in the spirit realm, is recalling the fact that that I came from tradition that says, court nature and she will reveal her secrets to you. And this is a venerating philosophy of science. So with Antares, we have this notion that we don't ask for knowledge to exploit. And if we and by the way, those who ask for knowledge to exploit, including intelligences, okay, the challenges to develop psychic abilities by, for example, CIA projects, was both the fact that those are senses, and okay, so the senses cannot be tested repetitively, and And people were afraid of the church, but also the fact that when they were trying to exploit these senses, they do not yield coherence, they do not yield the true cohesion, they do not yield the truth, they yield approximation of the truth. And you can watch my episode where we discuss the scientific aspect of that. But how did people practice science? It was not compartmentalized and orientalized or in a patriarchal structure. It was by um, sexual energy transmutation and psychic awareness, or what we call gnosis, that allowed us to see clearer. So, Antares here is about the psychic protection needed for the process to not to siphon sexual energy, not to have our energy siphoned, and yes, to connect with nature, or as the tradition says, court nature, and she will reveal her secrets to you. This is also true to the nature of our bodies, the nature of our pleasure, but here is more about transmuting the energy so that we can um, have an orgasmic abundance all the way, whether it's to the third eye, um, and that uh, yields, whether it's visions or senses or clear cognizance or clear knowing of nature. This is how people did science. Um, in the past, the church at the time of the Medici, and again, the Medici was an exchange and banking family, but they erected the Pope. And at the time of the Medici, there was Christianity, and it was only to the church to do that. But one cannot do art without connecting with nature. And Leonardo da Vinci eventually both channeled and observed nature, and he was the first empiricist. Also, Galileo Galilei, all were from the patronage of the Medici. And this creative discussion um, actually facilitates, because we see that the gnosis comes through the scientist, the gnosis comes through the artist, to the people, that the Medici is not a Medici without, but we cannot without the gnosis, we cannot without Mary Magdalene, and even in the scope of Christianity, and all those exploitation of nature. And by the way, we even in the Judaic biblical traditions see the call against the workers of the Baal, but then we see the word Baal for husband. So we see that there's the spiritual warfare exists through the scripture as well, and it is basically the war against rape, or the war against exploitation, or the war against slavery. When the Jews weren't doing it right, Jesus came, and so on and so forth. Um, and, and he came with Mary Magdalene. Very literally, they had a child. Okay, and the minute the traditions to try to control fertility are associated with slavery, and I'm not talking about birth control. Okay, it's just there's a difference between veneration of creation and awareness, and the attempt to castrate people after stealing their sperm or egg in order to clone, okay, which is already uh, it was not done by, let's say, donation of sperm. I don't think we have a way of donation of egg that is ethical. Um, and no, all these chemicals that are put into the body to rape it to produce eggs. I don't think that this is. I don't think that this is ethical. Um, and all the cloning methods that are done by basically stealing wombs, um, they have a malefic effect, and this is because the creation was not of love but of rape and exploitation, and usually that creation is meant to be a slave rather than to be but even with those people that were created in those ways, when they're not forward ritually abused, they do not continue to develop the trait of an energy siphoner, or people call it psychopathic or whatnot. So all of this very condensed to May. And by the way, May is self-pleasure May. Okay, in November, November was talking about decentralizing men, but in terms of the sexual energy, it's about preparing, or the abstinence before energy transmutation. May is about self-pleasure, because before we even engage in sexual relations, we need to know ourselves. Children naturally explore pleasures in their bodies, as they explore their own bodies, and but this is not to be explored with adults, um, and even amongst themselves, um, there needs to be caution so that they wouldn't harm themselves, because they're still children. It is about self-pleasure, and this is why May is also self-pleasure May. It's the initial sexuality that needs to be honored and have a place to grow before it can participate in sex with others. So it's a different type of veneration. Okay, if Scorpio is the abstinence from sex to prepare ourselves for sexual energy transmutation and knowing nature from a psychic point of view, Taurus is the embodiment experience of the self, and the self pleasure that is naturally growing, and yet if the only guard it needs is so that it will not go with, let's say, adults, or with other people, because it's still developing. Just like we don't eat unripe fruit. And by the way, Jesus saying that, um, okay, that the other denominations of Judaism at the time, he was born a Jew, um, were eating unripe fruit. This is basically the unripe fruit that 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 can be that he refers to. So he was trying to abolish the eating of the unripe fruit, or basically abolishing of pedophilia, being very graceful, being very tender in his teachings, and calling for love. But then what happens is the castration of the fig tree, which basically means if the fruits are no good, and this is basically the inbreeding. Okay, if the fruits are no good, and inbreeding creates genetic mutation that is creating all kinds of, okay, susceptibility to ailment, and genetic mutations. Um, and while it's a good thing to accept and love if people were born in inbreeding, or were born into those experiments, it's a good thing to accept and love the body with all its what people call deformities. And it's also important that the unripe fruit, or eating of the unripe fruit, yield those deformities. And while every soul is sacred, honoring the self-pleasure, or self-pleasure May, honoring the phase of the self-pleasure, the phase of where the sexuality is still developing, the phase where the child doesn't even know. Um, and and even as an adult, uh, by the way, when I learned about sex positive, one of the practices was to connect with our sense of naivete, which is the curiosity around our sexuality, around our genitals, around the sexual experience, no experiments. Okay, it's not an experiment; it's an experience. People can have experimentation, but it has to honor the experience and the embodiment. Um, and this is definitely, as adults, we connect with our sense of innocence upon sexuality. Okay, and this maintains the youth and maintains the pleasure, and is very healthy. But in that, we need to honor erotic and non-erotic, and we need to honor the developing erotic within the child that is not to be celebrated with adults. Uh, okay, and the non-erotic, both within the child and within the adult self, that is the yes, no, and maybe, that is the dance, and um, and what was obstructing that, a part of what what was obstructing that was the eating of the unripe fruit, was the interference in the child developmental phases, um, and no, having um, moon days does not denote that that phase is over. Okay, it is actually by exploring the yes, no, and maybe that one um, okay, well, upon adolescence, that one may come into actual sexual union. Um, Jupiter, that rules also the husband, um, matures at 60, but Venus only at 24. So it shows us that even the tradition, the astrological traditions, we need to sift, to sort the wheat from the milk, because how come? Okay, how come Jupiter matures at 16, but Venus at 24? Um, by the way, the Pluto generation of Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter, a lot of them married their high school sweetheart, which is basically the Sweet 16. um, at 16, I wrote I'm a night chart, so Venus is my benefic of sect, and I wrote 16 but not looking, um, because I saw that I was not ready to have a boyfriend at age 16. And in my 20s, there was already a ritual around the kidnapping of Madeleine. Funnily enough, I was residing in Arad, Israel, and I was speaking with the person who was living in St. Ilgen, next to Heidelberg, and both of us have been extremely affected by this. Um, he performed spiritual rape, and when I say he, I don't know if he was mind controlled when doing that, and definitely this it was the same landlord, realtor, that was doing all kinds of rituals. So it could have been that was an attempt to traffic me back then, and then they try to make me religious. They try to psychically try to force me into Judaic religions, and I'm like, no, that's not. This is not. There is a grand missing that those things don't answer, and it had to do with sexuality. Um, so very very condensed May. Um, Other than the lunations, Pluto will go retrograde on May 6th at 5 degrees Aquarius. Um, and we have a synodic cycle of the Sun and Uranus when Sun ingresses to Gemini May 22nd at 1 degree, which also conjoins Sedna. Um, Mercury conjoins Chiron on the full moon in Scorpio. So the wound around sovereignty and the effect on speech is probably going to be addressed at this full moon. Then Mercury ingresses to Taurus May 3rd. Sun opens the synodic cycle. We have what we call, some people call it Mercury Cazimi. I do not, we have to see in the sky if it's Cazimi or not. But we have a Mercury conjoining the Sun at May 14, which will be 23 degrees next to Beta Persei. Again, the effect of rape on speech, on the radiate, confident shine, the presence of the father. If the father was a rapist, then the child will be missing, the susceptible to be in Peter rings. If the father was not rapist, does the father stand against rape? Does the father believe? Does the father blame the daughter for being raped? In those societies where a father would kill a daughter or think that she is a whore if she was raped, those societies suffered a lot. Okay, they suffer lack of sovereignty, they suffer dependency on the Rockefellers, and they suffer dependency on the Rockefellers for oil and gas. They suffered invasion that decentralized their regimes. They suffer loss of an empire. Um, they um, and and those traditions, um, even the Judaic of them, okay, suffered a lot. My grandmother's family was from the Caucasian area, and then they moved to Cuba when she was 6. I think, or when she was 2 years old, and then they moved to Israel when she was 6. So she married very young, um, but um, so I did not get to see those traditions. But my grandfather family from Ukraine, and by the way, that my mother had to distance me from my grandfather physically, um, tells me that in his lineage there probably was incest or not honoring of the boundaries of children, and the entire family died in the Holocaust. Okay, only he and his brother survived. Um, because this is very, very challenging. And again, people are not to blame for the Holocaust, but definitely um, those costumes and habits, they make a lineage susceptible to losing everything, basically losing the wealth, intergenerational wealth, um, and and yeah, it could have affected my grandfather's ability to succeed in business because he had a food store, and if he would be, um, yes, I don't think that he was molesting children, because otherwise I would be talking to you from an island, or probably I wouldn't be, but um, but it also is a eureka where they couldn't really grow in business because he wasn't raping children, but he was also not posing a complete alternative. And if you would have a food-related business, sexual abuse cannot happen there. This is also going to the Sedna story. It comes from Inuit tradition, where Sedna was trafficked, and then the entire village had no food. She became goddess of marine life. Marine life is something people in the Arctic are very dependent on. Um, they do have agriculture, but they're very dependent on uh, basically what grows at sea. So uh, this is something that is very, very, very important. Okay, the connection of food, well-being, fertility, housing, business, um, and so I was going into a lineage that was an in-between. Okay, we're not Epstein's, but we also needed to recover from those themes as a lineage. Um, and this is also why, as a third generation to my grandparents, I re-envision wealth. And people that are third generation to something, I think it's a good custom to, it's a good tradition to rebel our parents and our grandparents, to maintain what is good and to rebel also their religions, also their traditions, also their cultures. Because 3 generations from now, there probably will be things that I don't see. And I may see as an astrologer, but it's different to see something and to live it. It was different for me to talk 3 years about the ingress of Neptune into Aries, and to live the ingress of Neptune into Aries. Um, I did not speak about those things that I speak about right now. Okay, I spoke in a different way, but this is a completely new phase that calls reconnection. with all of our origins. Okay, and this says, and when I understand why my lineage lost everything, um, including the lineage, then I can reinvent and change, and that allows actually to preserve the lineage and to preserve the legacy, rather than to go extinct with whether inbreeding or pedophilia or ritual abuse that in essence was meant to create slavery, and slavery creates Holocaust and exile. Okay, and this is also in our Palestinian, wider family, regardless of whether they are native to the land or immigrated to the land. If they enslaved the women, if they enslaved the children, if they raped, then they had Israel on them. It's kind of like there's always a bigger devil, and in that, and residing in Israel right now, there are even rabbinical people that, or people in the Orthodox community that are married to women that went through ritual abuse of Jews by Jews and called to abolish ritual abuse. So, and this is a point of reformation and revolution, where we have to understand that Prophet Amos, way before Jesus, talked about human trafficking and slavery as causing, and usury, that are all interrelated, as causing exile. Um, and May, very, very important month. Venus will ingress into Cancer on May 16, which means she will apply to square Neptune. She squares Neptune at 3 degrees Cancer. And the journey in Cancer right now is more using the exaltation in Cancer of Jupiter and the uh, pleasant experience of Venus in Cancer to go into the deep and reform and rejuvenate, so that we can connect with our origins. And it's also going to First Nations, so that we can connect with our origins, so that we can continue our lineage, so that we can not build intergenerational wealth, but continue intergenerational wealth. Because if somebody is a big POC person in the United States, um, then what happened before slavery? Okay, there was origins before slavery, and yet what went wrong that caused slavery? If we know that and that, if we know that, and Nelson Mandela was a great speaker in that regard, because he came from a native lineage of the monarchy and could not be a king because there was some sort of apartheid of bloodline segregation, okay, because it was a monarchy, and he would be the first prime minister, and he had to work both with what was good by those who enacted the apartheid. They were not just enacting apartheid. What was good from there? What is good from the origin? What needs to change in the origin? Oh, what needs to change in the origin is bloodline segregation. Is that stay in your lane? What is stay in your lane? You can't go to that mansion. You can't pick from that fruit. Why? Because it's that royal monarchy, and this is that, and this and that. It was like, okay, we have even since the Sami and the Inuit stories that tell of when the people were no longer sharing the abundance that's natural to the land, then they had disasters. And what's causing that is rape and molestation. And I'm saying that with zero accusation here, just a pattern. When there is molestation, when there is with sex within the family or sex with children, it affects the life energy. And then either there is either somebody cannot eat and cannot drink, or they are constantly hungry, constantly not satiated, because the minerals do not absorb well, and it's not gluttony. And then people begin to try to hoard wealth. Okay, so um, and if we understand that, and we understand that people simply grew their children that way, not all people will understand that. Then, okay, I'm not saying, oh, just like in the medicine, let food be our medicine, and that doesn't mean that there isn't the knife, okay? The knife is also a medicinal tool, but we don't have to use the knife. And the same as when we come to talk about these discussions and these traditions, because for many people it's that's how they grew, that's how their children grew, and they don't even know how to come out of those addictions to sex that they have, because they haven't been exposed to nourishment. Nobody was weighted when it came to them, and then they developed those urges that seem to be uncontrollable. And it happened not just with the Jews, and not just with the Inuit, and not just with the Arabs, and not just with the Africans, and not just with the elite, and not just with the European. So before we talk about the knife, it's important to talk about these topics, because in many cases we don't even need a knife. I remember when I walked, there was a guy that was catcalling me, and I simply uh, responded very aggressively to him, and he did not even understand he was doing something wrong. To me, it was very weird. And then he was like, okay, okay, and he learned something because he didn't know that before. And it was surprising to me. It was like, okay, 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 and it was and apologized to me and so on and so forth. Um, so he understood that he was behaving in a way that's not correct to behave with me. Now, of course, growing in such environment, it brings in the use of the knife because people are so exhausted from okay from that. But the more awareness that there is, the less we need to use the knife, because we become more nourished, and we become not abusive to ourselves and not abusive. Okay, a free man is not oppress another, um, and this is definitely a possibility of growth and change, um, of cultural norms and cultural traditions that I don't exclude. Of course, if somebody has to defend themselves from rape, they can kill, and if they have nothing to eat, they can even eat the body of the rapist. Okay, like I'm saying. I'm not joking. Okay, they better have better nourishment, because by the way, we began to eat cows in because cows were killing humans, and then we began to eat cows. But do we still need to eat cows today? I don't know. So so this is, and again, of course, people that are living in the Arctic eat caribou meat. Um, but it doesn't mean that if I live in the Middle East, I need to eat, caribou meat. Okay, and if I enjoy caribou meat, perhaps it can be a gift of what is allowed to feed, rather than to loot the Inuit for caribou. And this is how we maintain abundance, which is something that we weren't taught. Um, because picking some of the flowers encourages bloom, but um, picking all the flowers brings something that has to be industrialized for it to bloom, and then eventually it doesn't bloom. So this is something to keep in mind um, when we talk about May, and we'll probably have way more awareness. Um, Sun ingress to Gemini, conjoining Uranus, conjoining Sedna. Again, we have an opportunity to liberate from the father figure that trafficked his children. And it's not just Inuit tradition, okay? The father that trafficked his boys. If Neptune is the missing father, Neptune's son is the father that was missing, And he could have been missing because he was at work, could have been missing because he never got to be a father, he never got to be a child, and so he never got to be a father, and then he had children, and that could have been missing, or um, or he could have been mythical because there was scarcity around the experiences with the father. But um, Uranus Sun is liberating from father and fraternal notions that are um, that are not authentic to one's own radiant shining self. Okay, it is okay to rebel your father even if you appreciate him. It is okay to rebel your father even if you admire him, and take into consideration mostly. I may be biased because I have Uranus in the 10th house. 10th house is parents, but mostly what you appreciate about your parents most is their sense of rebelliousness. And so, okay, it's them going against the tide. My mother went against the tide. She was not going for, attempts to do IVF. Were not all that, not for IVF, not for adoption, but insisted on natural birth. Were there good things, bad things about it? Probably, but it was a rebellion to something that was of cloning tradition. And then I was born in the old hospital, where from the window my father saw the dew on the leaves, and he gave me my Hebrew name. My Dutch father gave me my Hebrew name Tali, um, and funnily enough, this is very native tradition. The native traditions, people usually give names for the baby that are inspired by the environment of their birthing. And so, actually, the father that, at least of which my mother could not bring children from his own sperm, he gave me with a name that was actually native. And so we have both the connection to nature, independently of basically the biologic tradition, but also the biological birthing that was preserved. And it is, of course, incredibly challenging, and being of lineage that's half Christian, half Judaic, and both of my parents were theistic. So when they met, so okay, very interesting story. And by the way, I have a karmic rope of the moon, I think, with all of my parents, which means that I naturally rebel them regarding creation. And rebel is revolutionize. And I know since very young age that what people called enlightenment was basically my lineage. And this is why when Pluto ingressed to Aquarius, I said, leave the lodges, but it's basically calling what the essence is, that we cannot be continuing our lineage with exploitation of the land or of nature or of people, and to take all the learning from different cultures and celebrating various cultures. Um, and I never took oath of silence, but even people that did, this was an invalid NDA. And again, there were experiments that were done in people that were born by cloning but not going through the rites of passage, which was ritual abuse. Um, they were not developing um, the exploitative qualities. And and here's the thing: actual wealth is preserved not by exploitation, the way that fertility is preserved not by rape or inbreeding. And so, Taurus is also about sharing our wealth. And when there is no rape, we're safer to share our wealth. Um, to keep something to ourselves, yes, okay, it's the sign after Aries, but also to share with others. And think about that phase of where we teach children that they can be their own doll that is their own, but there's also the things that they share with their brothers and sisters or with the other children, um, and they don't keep just everything to themselves. Um, this is very busy month of Taurus, and Mars will also conjoin Chiron, and this happens at 28 degrees, right where the lunation at the end of April was, with the new moon in April. So we see the conversation kind of like a fuga with variations, and how the organic evolution of the sky and the stars and the themes that we talk about and our own selves is happening here throughout the year. And I'll meet you with the astrology of June. Thank you for watching.